Nancy Berger is an author, speaker, and coach, drawing on personal life experience and years of research in the areas of cognitive behavior, behavioral finance, and neuroscience. Nancy is committed to helping people embrace and better understand their fears. So please help me welcome Nancy Berger.
Hi, everyone. I'm having fun looking in the chat at all the different classes that are attending today. Really excited to be here. Thank you, Melissa, for the nice intro and
welcome
for inviting me. Yeah,
we're ready to hear it.
So you guys got a little bit of backstory about me. As you know, I graduated in '82, and I can assure you that at the time I did not envision a career in fear strategy or in teaching people to navigate fear-based thinking. But as I'm sure a lot of you know already, if you haven't learned it yet, sometimes careers and lives take circuitous routes to different things. So I'm just glad to be here and share my experience with you guys today. And I'm looking forward to questions. So as I go through my presentation, which is probably going to be maybe around a half an hour, jot down any questions you have. Melissa's on it. She'll be seeing what you're sending in the chat, and I'll address them after the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully it will go smoothly. Okay, here we go. Melissa, just let me know if anything's wonky or you don't see it or whatever. Okay, very good. Okay, so what we're talking about today is fear. And we're going to talk about it maybe in a slightly different way than you may be accustomed to, because my working premise and the sort of the core of my work is that fear is really a good thing. Fear is something that gives us a heck of a lot of information about what's not working or what doesn't feel right. And that can, once we understand what those feelings are, we can really shift our path. So I kind of start this at this spot with a lot of people, like, are you feeling stuck? And what I mean by stuck is, are there thought patterns or sort of old tapes running in your head that keep you from maybe building a courageous path forward, or keep you from trying things you'd like to try or making shifts in your life? And that can transcend, you know, professional or personal. And today we're going to talk more about sort of career based things, but you know, the concepts really are the same regardless of the area of life we're talking about. Now, before we go forward, I want to just dig in a little on the word fear and kind of what it means. It is not a one-size-fits-all emotion, right? Fear is really a function of each of our unique life journeys. So what do I mean by that? The experience that you have, the teachings that you were, you know, exposed to as a young person, the memories, the interactions, the imprinting, this helps you cultivate a unique relationship with fear. And I call it the fear journey. And the first step in kind of understanding your unique fear journey is peeling back some layers and understanding how you've entered your adulthood, right? So we get really good at kind of compartmentalizing and putting things in boxes. But once I get people to sort of peel back layers, think about their young years, their young genius, you know, ages 7 to 9, when cognitively you're really soaking a lot of things up. How we were, you know, modeled in our first family, how we were taught can make a tremendous difference in how we relate to fear. So that's something that is an important part of understanding how you tick. So today, this is sort of the bullets of what we're going to be covering. And briefly, I'm not going to get in the weeds on any one of these things, but I'm trying to give you an overview and then allow you to leave today with something actionable and tangible that you can use to help shift your own fear-based thinking. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about the science of fear, just a couple of slides on how it all works in our brain and body. Then we'll move into fear-based thinking and what that looks like and how it can manifest. Then we'll talk about the context of career and how that sort of, you know, shows up in professional dynamics. Then we'll talk about the fear of failure, which is a nice segue from career, right? And then I'll close by giving you, as I said, a concrete strategy that I use with clients. So what we're not talking about today is this, okay? This is when you, that feeling, that's a fight or flight reaction, and that's a fight or flight fear. And it's important to discern between them because our bodies navigate and process it differently. Fight or flight comes from actually a different part of the brain. It comes from what we call the amygdala. So the amygdala are two little almond-shaped structures on either side of your spinal cord. And when you see a lion or, a spider, for me, a spider, if you're, high at the top of a building or you're about to bungee jump, right? Your amygdala gets activated. And that's a different pathway than the kind of fear process we're talking about today. Those kind of like feelings that you marinate in, those worries and anxieties, those originate from the cerebral cortex, your logic center, the gray matter of your brain. So it's just important to understand that, you actually do process different feelings from different parts of your brain. So again, we're talking about worry, fret, how am I going to pay my bills? Am I going to get the job? Am I qualified? Dread, different anxieties and worries that sort of fester in our brains. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about today. And those are the kind of fears that I help people shift. I use what I call the fear formula. I created this acronym to describe the steps that I use and teach to shift fear-based thinking. Those steps are find, enlighten, accept, and reframe. So the first step, as I said, digging in, peeling back, finding your fears. You might be surprised to know that a lot of people and people that I talk to, work with, have a little bit of trouble articulating what they're feeling. And this is not a unique situation. So generally, we're not all that good at identifying our feelings. And this is not my opinion. There's science that backs this up. So when you get good at ignoring or kind of like sleepwalking over and accommodating for the fears that you have, you get some muscle memory on that. And it can take a little bit of time to figure out what exactly is under your skin. So the first step is find. Second step, enlighten, means to understand where the fears come from. That gives you an awful lot of information and allows you to connect dots with how you may be showing up in your life today. The third step is accept. So once you accept that you have this fear, whatever it is, these fears, then you're giving yourself the ability to then, the last step, reframe. So until you can kind of identify what the things are that are bugging you, identify the ick factor, whatever's under your skin, and understand where it might be coming from, you can't accept it. Once you accept it, take agency. Okay, then there's tools and skills and actionable strategies for shifting your thought processes around those fears. And that's the reframe step. So you might be asking yourself, well, how does all that work? It sounds good, but I don't know how I can change my thoughts. Human beings are meaning makers. We spend every day, all day, attaching meaning to things. It's just what we do. Okay, so think about it. Think about your own life and the number of times in a day that you create a narrative about something. And sometimes the narratives may be exactly correct. A lot of times they're not. A lot of times we, project whatever our own fear-based thought processes are on the experience that we have on any given day and create a story about them. And then what we do is we look around for evidence to confirm that the story is true. It's called cognitive bias. And if anybody knows of Daniel Kahneman, he won a Nobel Prize for his work in behavioral finance and cognitive biases and wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow, which is a fascinating read, although it's not easy. It's not an easy read, but I would highly recommend it. And it talks about all of these biases that we are prone to all the time. And cognitive biases, there are over 200. There may be more than that. But what we do is we say, oh, that happened because of X, Y, Z, and then we look for reasons to believe ourselves. So it's important to be able to sort of meta think and stand aside and say, I'm having this thought and I'm not really sure it's based on fact. But that's not an easy thing to do. So that's part of the practice that we're talking about today. Because feelings are not choices. Feelings come in and we cannot control that. Thoughts are choices. And that is a difficult concept sometimes to really embrace. We think, well, the thoughts, well, if I think it, it must be true. But more often than not, it isn't true. And then not only do we spin a tale about it, we might actually react or behave based on that narrative. And if you think about it, if you're operating on fear-based thinking, you don't really understand where it's coming from. You have thoughts about that are sort of triggered by those fear-based thoughts, and then you react based on them. You can go down a rabbit hole. So it's really helpful to be able to identify your own thought process and what's going on there. So the scientific word for being able to shift your thinking and shift your brain wiring because of that is called neuroplasticity. And it's something that we have the power to do. And I love this visual of Dorothy in the ruby slippers because we all have the power right now to change our brain's wiring. And that's a lofty concept, but there's tremendous research, particularly in the last decade, about how the brain processes thoughts and how changing thoughts can change the brain's wiring. So to give you a little bit of context, when we learn a new skill, like a language or how to play the guitar or driving, we are creating new pathways, right? We're firing different synapses, neurons, where you're changing your brain, you're learning. But research has shown that even thinking about doing those things, thinking about doing something new, changes your brain's wiring. And that's pretty powerful, right? So it's not just, when you hear talks about mindfulness and talks about, positivity and envisioning positive outcomes and all, science backs it up. You can actually change your experience by changing your thoughts. And when it comes to fear-based thinking, that is tremendously powerful and can open up lots of wonderful doors for you. So what does all this mean for career? Well, think about the power. Well, first, think about the times in your professional life that you've, created narratives and then maybe operated based on those narratives without checking yourself. If they came from old fear-based thought patterns, you could have convinced yourself of something that was absolutely untrue, and then maybe made a career choice based on it, or had a conversation with a manager or with your sales team, based on that. So understanding what's fact, in empowering yourself to discern in your thoughts, to discern between what's based on fact and what may be based on fiction, it could be an ace in a hole, right? Because you'll really have sort of perspective that you might not have had before. So this is a mantra that I use often in my talks and in my coaching. Don't believe everything you think. May sound obvious. I have like plaques, I've given them to my children. It is a really helpful thing to remember. When you have a thought, first of all, whether or not it's based on an old fear or whatever, any thought you have, it's a really powerful tool to stop, to pause and say, I'm having a thought, that's interesting. Just, you don't have to believe it automatically, okay? So this concept of fact and fiction is an important part. It goes to the core of my work, and it goes to the core of shifting fear-based thinking. What are the facts? What are the narratives? And how prone am I right now in this moment, in this experience I'm having with, name it, in a personal relationship, in a work relationship, in a parenting relationship? What cognitive biases are at work right now? It's just a plethora of stuff, right? If you think about your own life and the different interactions you've had, you probably can fill in these blanks pretty quickly. So then let's talk a little bit about the fear of failure, because when it comes to workplace dynamics, career growth, this is huge. and it's just one aspect of fear-based thinking, but I think it's so important to talk about, especially when within the context of workplace dynamics. So let's first talk a little bit about failure. You may not be surprised to hear me say that your relationship to failure, like your relationship to fear, is unique to you. So it means different things to different people. And getting to the root of that, is helpful in most cases when I talk to people about their work relationships, their professional relationships. Because if you think failure is a bad thing, what's it going to get in the way of? Innovation, suggesting a change in process, picking up the phone and doing the cold call, doing the sales call. There's so many things that it can impede if you believe it to be a negative thing. And often if you're in a leadership role, a management role, sometimes there's this misconception that you have to be all things to all people, or you have to be infallible, right? You have to maybe not expose yourself as vulnerable to failure, as it were. And what culture does that establish? What stage does that set in the workplace, right? So here's a couple of quotes that really resonate with me. One from Mia Hamm, who knows a thing or two about like that envisioning success and working towards the goal, working towards the championship. Failure happens all the time. It happens every day in practice, right? What makes you better is how you react to it. So in one sentence, she's pretty much explaining the whole process, right? You have to accept that you have to understand how you tick, accept that it's going to happen, and then choose how you're going to think about it, how you're going to approach it. The British author Ken Robinson is just a fabulous guy and a TED presenter. He unfortunately passed away last year, but he said, if you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original. So again, this concept, it's how you approach it. So failure is just a great case study in how we approach fear and how we can change our approach to fear, right? Because if you think of it like, well, it's a bridge to innovation, right? If you think about failure as a bridge to innovation, how would that change? How would that manifest in the way you approach your work and the way you approach your colleagues, your team, think about it, right? It would lift a lot of that heaviness from it. And then you might be more apt to try things, to suggest things, to, even rock the boat a little if processes aren't working smoothly. An Ernst & Young survey that was done in 2018 found in the survey, 80% of respondents said that failure at work can boost innovation. That's a pretty dramatic finding. And Jeff Bezos, and I've heard him say in a podcast I was listening to years ago, he was quoted as saying to his people, you have to fail more. You have to fail. Failure is not optional. It comes part and parcel with invention, again. And this is not a man who is not familiar with things not working, right? He's had some galactic failures, drugstore.com being one of them. So just to recap, fear, what is it? It's a tool for learning. Again, how are we approaching it? How are we kind of embracing this concept? And at the core of my messaging, right, my medicine is it's an ally, it's a resource, it's an informant, it will help you. It's a tool for learning. The second thing is we can change the brain's wiring. Isn't that great? Because, we can actually change our experience, right? And failure, one type of fear, is crucial for innovation. So it kind of paints a different picture of this thing that we all kind of know is there, but sometimes try to avoid, right? Fear-based thinking. So that's all great, right? How do I help myself with it? What can I do? What can you do actively to shift some of those nagging fear-based thoughts that you have? I'm going to teach a strategy that I use often and that is very effective. It's called the fear to want strategy. So what does that mean? Let me explain. So fear, think about how we approach a fear, right? I'm afraid of blank. I'm afraid that blank. So automatically you are in a negative thought, a negative mindset, and an avoidance driven mindset. You are on the defense. I'm afraid of something, so I'm going to clench and I'm going to avoid it. So it puts you in more of a victim mindset. Now, what I do with people is I have them actually list fears, write them down, and then we reword them into a want. What does that do? Well, let's look at this. I'm afraid of, change it to, I want to blank. Right away, you're shifting your brain's wiring. You're going into positive intention. You're going into a purpose-driven mindset, and you're moving into offense, right? Moving forward as opposed to defense. You're using your energy on a growth path instead of an avoidance path. It changes everything. And the fascinating thing is when people speak this, when they speak their fear and then they speak their want, they are physically different, right? Stand up a little taller, chest is out a little bit more. It's just an empowered, approach instead of an avoidance approach. So fear is also a reactive, position that you're in versus a purposeful, leaning in. This is what I want. This is what I'm going to do, rather than this is what I don't want and this is what I'm going to avoid. So here are a couple examples. If you're thinking about starting a business, say, I'm afraid my idea will be copied. And this came from a client. So what was the want? I want to create an original idea with a competitive edge. Just speaking the words is a different experience. But this is just one small example. And I'm hoping that you're kind of thinking of your own fear-based thoughts and how this would feel to you if you shifted them into wants. Another example, I'm afraid that if I end my relationship, I'll be sad and bitter. I want to feel loved, heard, validated, and good in my skin. Feels better, right? It always feels better when I shift. And one thing I do is I have people write them on index cards, and then on the flip side, they write the want. And it's just really a fun exercise. And it always gets some aha moments for people. So I want, I will, right? Suddenly you're kind of like, okay, I got this. And that affects your brain and your body. Okay, so we're not even going to debate the brain-body connection, because I'm sure everybody here knows that that's pretty much a scientific conclusion. This is not up for debate. So when you shift into that, I want, I will, I'm going to do this thing, it's pretty powerful, and you can feel, even if you're a little trepidatious about, making the suggestion to management about changing the process at work, or talking to a friend that, you have concerns about the friendship and you're not feeling great about it, or talking to your kids about, whatever, drug paraphernalia you may have found in their coat pocket, like the possibilities are endless, right? But when you can tap into your own experience with fear, you're then able to really map out, your fear journey, as I call it, your fear resume, your relationship, how it leads to you showing up in your life, how it leads to you showing up in all the different areas of your life. And then you can, in an informed way, in a purposeful way, shift things around. From that to that is a powerful and accessible transformation. So my tagline is find your fear, find your way, because I really believe that that's how it works, right? And that's how it worked for me. So before we go to Q&A, I want to just give you might be wondering why I do this work. How did you get from Albany in 1982 to this? So I graduated and went into finance. And I worked on Wall Street, and then went into the foreign bank network and worked in finance and corporate lending. And I never liked it. But I thought I hated finance, and I didn't. I actually love finance. I just didn't want to be a banker. But the work I do now comes from my personal experience with fear. And by that, I mean spending about 30 years being afraid of just about everything. And not to the degree that I was not functioning, as I had a career, started a career as a writer, which I still am today. Got married, had children, lived my life, but was never comfortable in my skin. And it was only when I had some, aha moments of my own that weren't pleasant, that I realized I was not understanding myself. I was not understanding my own relationship with fear-based thinking. And once I did that, through using the tools that I teach, everything changed. And it wasn't an easy trip, wasn't a pleasant trip always, but I figured if I could do this for other people and save them a little time, then that would be very fulfilling. So that's how I got here today. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. Melissa, if there are any questions that popped up right away, we can address them, or however you want to run it.
We have a couple questions, so let's get started. So Jody Johnson wants to know, and this is a little bit long, but I think that we'll listen to the whole thing because we need to read it all. How do we reframe our fears and anxieties in our professional settings when we seem to inevitably run up against other people in our field who are insecure with themselves and project their fears onto us through their words and actions, which for me personally keeps reinforcing my worries about my own confidence and my abilities? Is there a fundamental way to reframe how we view coworkers and clientele who create toxic workplace environments?
Yes. The short answer is yes. So Jody, it's Jody, right?
Yes.
Thanks for asking that question. That is something that I hear a lot. And the short version of this is, it's really important, and you're already halfway there, I can tell through your question, to discern between the other person and your thought process. So no one makes you feel any particular way. You feel what you feel because of your own experience and your own fear journey, right? So when there's toxic exchanges in a workplace, or I'm just using an example. If you feel demeaned when you are having an exchange with a coworker or a manager, or you feel belittled, or you feel whatever it is, the important thing is to stay with the you and do some work around why you're feeling that way, because there's a reason for it. It goes back to maybe old relationships of yours, past experiences of yours, someone early in your life that did a certain thing similarly, spoke like that to you, it didn't feel good, and it triggers you. So it's really important to understand that you're having this experience just like they are, but stay in your lane and work on you, because you cannot control how people talk to you. You cannot control how people behave, but you certainly can control how you process that and react to it. And if you're thinking, well, that sounds a little philosophical, think of it this way. If you're in the workplace and somebody says something, someone behaves in a passive aggressive way, say, you can sort of notice it. It takes practice. So understand this is not automatic. It takes practice, but notice it. Say, that seems like it's a little passive aggressive, and I wonder what experience they're having that's causing them to behave that way. But it's their experience, it's not yours. So the trick is to not take it on, not absorb it like I caused it, or it's something that I'm doing or not doing, because it's all about them, just like your reaction is all about you. Now, I'd like to know if that resonates or if she needs clarification. I don't want to move on.
Well, if she's got additional questions or wants to follow up, please go ahead and put that in the Q&A, and I'll share that.
Yes, and it goes without saying that you guys can find me easily, and you can either, on Instagram, DM me, email me, we can set up a call if you need it, if you need to sort of dig in a little bit more, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, and I'll be sending out a follow-up email, so I will include Nancy's contact information for folks that might want to reach out. Here's another question from Zoe. Jody said, yeah, thank you. It does resonate. She's all set. So, all right, good. Zoe wants to know, are there any worksheets or guided journals that you would recommend to help with fear-based thinking?
Well, I have, some worksheets that I've created for my clients, and I'm also going to be launching an online course in May. That's a 6-module self-paced course that has a lot of collateral worksheets and different things, videos that might be helpful. Outside of that, I don't know of any guided journals in the fear-based thinking space. There's many journals available from many different, gratitude journals and different sorts of journals. I would say though, let's think horses, not zebras. Like if you just use any journal, any notebook, dedicated notebook, to writing down and identifying fear-based thoughts, or when things crop up, write them down, and then use the strategy that we learned today, shifting them into wants and seeing if that resonates with you. Or just the mere fact that you're identifying them and writing them down will help you be aware. So when they crop up, you can say to yourself, okay, I'm noticing that thought, and that's a fear-based thought. You know what I mean? So it's a little discovery work you can do on any dedicated journal, and just keep it nearby so that as you get triggered, you can identify those. That would be really helpful.
Great. All right, here's another question. I have a general anxiety at work. How do I identify specifically what's making me anxious?
Okay, so that's a little bit of a layered question, because anxiety can come in many forms and show up in many forms. And there's like generalized anxiety, which I know of people and work with people that have that, can sometimes get in its own feedback loop. And by that, I mean, if you're having anxiety, your sort of amygdala and cortex can start bouncing off each other like a pinball machine, and you can get in a loop where you can't really break the cycle, right? You feel like you're just in it and you can't. So what I would say, without knowing your personal story or your background, I would say, try to, again, identify the situations that trigger you. Identify and remember what's happening in the moment that you feel this anxiety, because you might not, when you get an anxious brain, as opposed to wise brain, when you get into anxious brain, you're not really thinking all that clearly, right? You're kind of going back into the lizard part of your brain. So if you feel the feeling in your body, and I'm like really anxious and I don't know why, note the circumstances, note the environment, the surroundings, who you just talked to, what time of day it is, what you just ate, if you had coffee. Like, try to really be mindful of what happened in that moment. And that could help you, identify some patterns, or just know, even if it doesn't enlighten you terribly, it's great information to have, because if you take the next step of trying to either talking to somebody, a therapist or somebody, having that information can be really helpful to you. So I always advocate for taking notes, like really being aware of what's going on when you're feeling feelings in your body. Also, as an aside, there are many energy medicine techniques that I teach, breathing, things to calm your nervous system down, that are tremendously powerful for when you get in those pockets of anxiety in your workday or any time of day. And they're not things that are going to make you look weird, like you're going to be sitting on the floor. There's things you can do that are very nuanced and subtle, and that can help you.
Well, that may address a little bit this next question. I need to have a difficult conversation with my boss, and every time I think about it, I get so afraid. What can I do?
Okay, I'm going to tell you 5 things to do. And this is I give this talk a lot. You'd be surprised how much. 5 steps to having difficult conversations. Okay, the first step is unpacking the fear, understanding what you're afraid of. Right? What is it? Are you, more times than not, you're projecting how your boss is going to experience you. That's 90% of the time. You're making assumptions and predictions about what your boss is going to think or say. That's not your job. So another step is do your job. Stay in your lane. Stay with the you. When you start that conversation with your boss, you use I statements, not you statements, because no one can argue with I statements. I feel like my path in this role is whatever it is. I'm making things up. Just stay with the I. That's very empowering, and it takes away that, oh, well, they can disagree with me. They can't disagree with you. Don't be sorry. don't be sorry, okay? If you're expressing yourself and you're expressing your feelings with respect professionally, there is nothing to be sorry for. So even inside your head, don't be like, oh, I feel so bad I'm saying this. Speak your truth and do it with resolve, but don't apologize for it. So what did I do? Unpack the fear, don't be sorry, stay in your lane. Say it, then wait. So when you talk to your boss and you present whatever grievance it is, or if it's just you want to talk about your career path or whatever it is, speak your truth, let it sit and let them respond. Too often we're very uncomfortable with silence and we try to fill it, and that is counterproductive. So just practice ahead of time, write down the points that you want to make. You want to make them for a good reason. You're having an experience at work that you want to bring to your boss's attention. They might not even be aware. They might not even be aware that you're unhappy or that you have concerns or whatever it is. So don't project, don't do their job for them. And however they experience you is not your responsibility. It doesn't mean you don't care, but it's not your responsibility. So I hope that's helpful. You can go to my website and it's a freebie on my website, 5-step guide to difficult conversations.
And actually it seems like, we discussed this in the context of work, but certainly those 5 steps seem like they would be very applicable in personal relationships as well.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think that's valuable for all of us. All right, we have a few more questions. While going through infertility, I was terrified for 5 years that I would never get to be a parent. How do we stop being afraid of things that are out of our control? And that certainly applies to work, but also to personal life and personal situations.
Yes, and I can tell you from personal experience, not with infertility, but leaving a 27-year marriage and parenting a child with special needs. I mean, the fear is sometimes so big that you feel consumed by it. But what you said in your question, things we can't control. So it is really training your brain to discern between the things you can't control. Accepting that you can't control them is the way to let them go. And I'm sure you know this, and I'm saying something that's obvious, but that fear and, when it gets teeth like that, it doesn't help you. It doesn't help that journey particularly, right? Physically, it doesn't help because you're clenched and you're nervous and you're scared, and it can work against you. So since you already are aware that is out of your control, right? What happens is that when you use techniques like meditation, belly breathing, tapping, energy medicine. Also, I have a video on my course that's a tongue relaxation exercise, and it sounds really funny, but it is so effective, and you could do it anywhere. But when you can calm your parasympathetic nervous system down, it really does help tremendously. These body-brain connections are so strong. So you're halfway there. You can't control the outcome necessarily, but you can do everything in your power to create the best environment for the positive outcome. Part of that is self-care and calming things down. So I can't say enough about that.
Okay, Joanna asks, can Nancy address self-doubt and how many women in the workplace struggle between a work-life balance, being a good mother versus being successful in your career, and the fears associated with failing in both areas or not being good enough?
Yeah, you may not be surprised to hear I hear this a lot. So yes, and in fact, I began my journey in this work working primarily with women, but now I work with everybody. But so because it is this work-life balance notion, I don't really feel it's achievable. I think that we do our best in these different pockets of our life. We show up as best we can. When you have young children at home, when you have children at home and you have a full-time job and you're running a house and you're running a marriage or a partnership, how can there be balance? There's just too many components for them to be in balance. So when I'm sure everybody, there's a little bit of an eye roll with the mindful living concept, but let me weave it in here in a practical way. this idea of mindfulness is a self-preservation technique, because we can't really be balanced in all of these different things we're trying to accomplish, right? Especially now, so many women sitting at home on Zoom calls, and they're, somebody runs in with a Superman cape, and, I mean, it's just, we're living in a parallel reality right now. So I know this is a huge struggle, and I'm not trying to be simplistic about it, but what I am saying is that you can do one thing at a time, and you can do one thing now. You can't do 7 things now, right? And so what I tell women that are professional women working full-time jobs and have kids at home and everything, that these feelings of I'm not doing anything well, that's fear-based thinking, right? You're creating stories in your head. And that saps your life force. That saps your energy. So the more you can be in the moment, in that present moment, and do your best, the best thing you can right then, and not think, oh, what I'm not doing, or the deficits that I'm creating right now by doing this thing, it's training your brain. It's identifying what it is that you're feeling afraid of. Is it mostly, oh, she's going to think this or he's going to think that? Well, that's in your control, right? And then experiencing the present, staying in the present and doing the best you can then, but not measuring yourself by external metrics. Lots of the time, the conversation comes right down to that. External versus internal. Well, everybody else is doing it so well. Who says? And social media is everybody's private reality show. We know that, right? So nobody's doing it perfectly. There's no value in perfection. And if you can stay in the present and experience that moment, you're going to do your best there. And then you can go to the other moment. But trying to figure out balance and how you're going to do it all is futile. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. Okay, a couple more questions. What's your advice on how to approach a parent that you've now noticed had a controlling behavior over your childhood, and you have a fear of confronting them now as an adult, that it's been hard to have the courage to address them?
That's a tricky one, because for 2 reasons. Well, for many reasons, but these are the 2 I'm gonna say right now. The parent, you may be aware of that dynamic. That doesn't mean the parent is going to embrace your awareness of that dynamic. By that I mean, it may feel good to get it off your chest, but know what you know. Understand what meaning you're attaching to an outcome. Because if you're attaching meaning to whether or not that, actually think about the scenarios. Is the parent going to say, you're right, I did that? If the parent hasn't done any work or raised their awareness about that dynamic, that very well may not happen. And then you're going to find yourself in maybe a toxic exchange that leaves you feeling less good than you wanted to. So this is a situation that can go in a lot of different ways. So what I tell people is, number one, it may be really helpful to talk to a therapist, a licensed therapist, about how to approach that, because I don't know your story and I don't know the background, and I am certainly not a therapist. But in my personal experience, and I've been in therapy for 30 years, those dynamics with family members can go awry because we feel the awareness and we want to, enlighten them, and we want to share what we know, and we want to get it off our chest and all these things. But on the other end, we check whether you have reason to believe they're going to, 1, embrace that conversation, 2, respond well to that conversation, and 3, is it going to change anything? So those are things that are important to sort of tap into.
More. I've noticed recently that before I go to sleep, I think about potential hiccups and issues that might happen at work the next day. It's been occurring for the past couple of months. That's me every night. Is this fear-based thinking? If so, can the fear to want technique you discussed be useful here?
Yes, it's fear-based thinking. It's a little bit of catastrophizing that we all do. It's like, oh gosh, if that happens, then that happens. So the fear to want strategy is a really helpful one for that. And another strategy I use that's really helpful for this particular thing is called the then what exercise. So then what? Then what? Ask yourself then what every time you have these thoughts and carry it through all the way, kind of like pulling a string on your sweater. Then what happens? Then what happens? And more often than not, there is no Armageddon at the other end, and there's problem solving that you can activate in your brain. But if it's kind of like, sometimes with my children, I've done this, oh, well, I'm, when they were looking for jobs, and no one's ever going to hire me. Then what? Then I'd have to live with you. Okay. Right. So it's just like, go through the exercise and you may be surprised at how doable all of these situations really are, but it's just a mental practice.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, great. I'm gonna try that. Beverly says, how do I deal with the fear that how do you deal with the fear that the feelings you express with your boss may be shared with others? Working in a toxic environment in which people would rather talk around people instead of to them is something that I'm struggling with.
Okay. And again, we go back to this concept. If everybody can really embrace this concept of external versus internal, what can I control? What can I not control? And how invested am I in what I cannot control? Because what does that mean? If we're invested in things we can't control, fundamentally, we're really barking up the wrong tree, right? If we are attaching to the outcome that we cannot control, that's crazy making, right? So if you speak with professionalism and respect in the eye to your boss about whatever that may be, and your boss goes and tells other people and it creates toxic narrative that you may or may not be privy to in the workplace, that's not your problem, right? Now, you may be saying, oh, well, that's easy for you to say. Well, I've been in it. I know what it feels like, but there is so much power in letting go of that investment, right? You show up the way you want to show up. And again, then what? So the boss talks and people are talking behind your back, maybe, maybe not. We really don't know. And we really maybe don't care. Like if something emerges and it affects our career path, well, then there's repercussions, then there's actions that we can take. Then we're talking to HR and we're doing whatever. But let's deal with that and if it happens. But again, we're going back to the narratives. We're making all this meaning, we're making all these stories all day long. It's exhausting. Imagine if you can make a few less stories, how much nicer it's going to be for you. Now, it's not easy, I know. Like I've been doing this for over a decade, so I've gotten muscle memory on it. Somebody asked me the other day, oh, when you teach people these strategies, how long does it take them to get good at it? I said, well, it takes some people, a week, it takes some people a year. So, but start practicing it now and see how it feels in your body. And I would venture a guess that it's going to feel pretty liberating to let go of the stuff that you have no control over.
Yeah, so true. Okay. Rosanna says, I get panic attacks while driving on highways. I feel like I could potentially get into an accident and die, which stays in my mind when I say, what's the worst thing that could happen? How do you recommend dealing with panic attacks for something that could have a bad outcome?
Yes, panic attacks are no fun and are no laughing matter. So since, again, I don't know you or your background or your profile, I would definitely talk to a mental health professional or a medical professional about the panic attacks. I believe strongly in energy medicine techniques and tapping techniques to access parasympathetic nervous system, calming things down that can really help you in the moment of the panic attack when you pull over. Something as simple as diaphragmatic breathing, because when you're in a panic attack, you are all up in your chest, right here, right? And your sympathetic, your nervous system is whacked and everything is out of whack. Once you can go down into your belly, under your diaphragm, it changes everything in your body. But you have to be able to do it and be aware of it. So I hesitate to suggest that for you because that's dangerous if you're driving and you're having a panic attack. Your heart could hurt, your chest could hurt. So I would talk to a professional and maybe either get some sort of a medication that can help you in those moments, or techniques from them. But I would strongly suggest meditation techniques, even get the Calm app on your phone or Headspace or something that in that moment you can access to help you. And when you practice these things over time, you might find that you get fewer and fewer panic attacks.
Great. Well, I think that's all the questions we have. If nobody else has any additional questions, any last pieces of advice, Nancy?
Well, I would say this topic is kind of a lot to digest in an hour. And the presentation, there's a lot of information here. So if anybody has any follow-up questions, I would encourage them to reach out. Also, I just want to give a couple of quick takeaways, sort of condense everything down. Your thoughts are the root of everything, right? Fear-based thoughts, any kind of thoughts. Thoughts are where everything starts and everything can change. So if you take away one thing from today's presentation, let it be that you are in control of your thoughts. You're in control of how you react to any situation you come up against. And the trick is to practice ways of shifting your thoughts when you find yourself in that like gritty, like ticked off, zone. There's ways to practice and strategies you can use to shift them. So I would just encourage everybody to take that away from today. And it was really lovely to answer these questions. They were great questions.
Fabulous. And I will remind everyone, the recording will be available on the Alumni Association's career website. So if you want to go back and re-listen, because there was a lot of content in there and I was taking notes, but you can go back. It'll be up in the next couple of days. And again, I will share Nancy's contact information with you as well in my follow-up email. So I'm glad you could all join us today. I hope you took away some good tips on how we can manage the stress and anxiety and fear in our lives. So have a great afternoon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.